you are looking at the world's fastest graphics card. Like all things premium, this thing is going to cost you a lot. You can build an entire gaming PC for what Nvidia asks for this graphics card, and that PC can still play all of the latest games at decent resolution and frame rates. But the 4090 is on a completely different league. No graphics card gets even close to what this card can do, and it is going to stay like this for quite some time now. Okay, so let's start things with the unboxing. Now the RTX 4090 comes in this huge black box, and now the box opens up in this classic flip-up manner that we also saw in the RTX 30 series graphics card, and I think this is pretty sweet. Now you get the RTX 4090 right over here with some meme-inspired velocity marks. I guess the designer plays a lot of Fortnite. Now, alongside the graphics card, we also get the 12VH power cable and some paperwork, and that is all. Now I am giving the unboxing a solid 9.5 of 10. It totally deserves it. So now let us talk a bit about the graphics card. Now this is the RTX 4090. It is based on the flagship 8102 GPU from Nvidia, which packs 16,384 CUDA cores. That is a massive jump from the 3090 Ti. Now everything has been bumped up. More texture mapping units, more render output units, more ray tracing cores, more tensor cores, but the memory has more or less stayed the same. But what has changed in the memory is the bandwidth. Now the size has stayed the same, 24 gigabytes. It is still GDDR6X, and the bus width remains the same, 384-bit. But what has changed is that it is 21 gigabit per second GDDR6X. That is a solid pump from last gen. Now like all Lovely's video cards, the base and boost clock speeds of the 4090 are a bit on the higher side. You can easily see the graphics card hitting 2500 plus megahertz in video games, and that is a solid step up from last gen, and to be honest, it's not quite a good move, but it is how this architecture works, and we just cannot blame Nvidia for packing a video card with high clock speeds. Now Nvidia has managed to pack far higher CUDA cores, more clock speeds, and a faster memory without increasing the clock speed. This graphics card still draws 450 watts, at least on the base Founder Edition model, just like the 3090 Ti, and this is a big W. Okay, now let's look about this new Ada Lovelace architecture and how things work over here. And so this new architecture is based on TSMC 4nm process, and it also comes with new tensor cores, 3rd generation, RT cores, and even CUDA cores have been improved by a bit. So for the same CUDA core count, the same RT core count, you're going to get more performance out of the video cards from the RTX 40 series lineup. Now, you must have heard of NVENC, which is Nvidia's encoder, or NVDEC, which is Nvidia's decoder. Well, with this new generation, the cards can now support 8K 10-bit 60 frames per second video encoding, which is really high. Now one of the most important features of these new 40 series cards is support for AV1 encoding and decoding. Now AV1 is the next step in video encoding and decoding, and Intel supports it with the latest lineup. Now this is a smart move on Nvidia's part, but as of filming there is still no benchmark to judge how good the 4090 is in AV1 encoding and decoding. Okay, so now let us look at this Founders Edition version of the 4090 and check out how it is in comparison to other video cards on the market. Now these new 4090 Founders Edition cards share a lot in common with the Ampere cards. They look almost similar, but now they're thicker and bigger and more power inefficient. Now if you ask me, I will say that Founders Edition cards are one of the best options on the market in terms of design. The cards look bold and they have a strong design language, and they just look minimalist and clean. Now compare that to my iQIYI X4 RTX 3070. I mean, this in no way is a bad looking video card, but it just is not that clean and minimalist like the Founders Edition. Now most AIB card manufacturers will hide the heatsink to help with the aesthetics, but Nvidia uses it as a design cue, and I really like it. Now this also makes the card extremely detailed with all of these grooves and ridges just running across the surface. Now coming to the rear of the card, you can easily see that Nvidia is using it to exhaust all of the heat generated by the video card. Now you also get 4 video outputs, which is a standard on most modern video cards. 3 of them are DisplayPort 1.4, which is a bit disappointing. And the other 4th one over here is HDMI 2.1. Now the 4090 Fe comes with two fans. Now both of them measure 112mm, but one of them is placed on the bottom and the other one is placed on the top. Now both of these fans pull air into the card and much of the heat is dissipated by the sides or just here in the rear. Now the layout is very similar to what we saw with the 3090 Fe and the 3090 Ti Fe, and it is nothing new. Okay, now the card packs some massive heatsink. Now just don't take my word, just check out this card's weight. It weighed in at over 2200 grams, which easily makes it one of the most heavy graphics cards you can buy. Now over 99% of this card's weight is attributed to the heatsink, and there are good reasons why Nvidia did this. Now well, initially when Nvidia was designing the 4090, the cards were being planned to draw even more power and clock even higher probably, and just deliver much more performance than what it can right now. But at some point down the pipeline, Nvidia decided to just lock the 4090 Fe at 450 watts and keep the clock speeds at what they are right now. Well, this is also the reason why you see many third-party AIB cards boosting up to 600 watts. Well, so that was what Nvidia was probably thinking for the entire 4090 lineup, but they just come at 450 watts these days. Well, so the power draw changed, probably even the clock speeds changed, but the heat sinks remain unaltered, and today they are just way overkill for what the 4090 needs. Okay, now this kind of overkill treatment does backfire at some points. The 4090 won't fit in every case out there. Well, in my XPG Battle Cruiser, which happens to be a bigger than usual case, the 4090 simply won't fit with the cables plugged in. Now even in the Lion Land Cool 3, which happens to be one of the largest cases you can buy today, the 4090 was barely fitting, and we were clearly violating the 35mm rule that Nvidia is hollering about ever since the card launched. So if you're buying one of these cards, just make sure you have one of the largest cases in the market, or you might run into serious problems. Now overall, the 4090 Fe packs a beast of a cooler, and well, this card really looks sporty when installed in a build. I'm giving this an 8 of 10 considering all of the aspects. Alright, now let us look at the test bench that I used to benchmark this video card. So we were using a Ryzen 9 7950X, which is cooled with a Lion Galahad 360 AIO cooler. Now all of this had on the B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi motherboard from MSI, and we are using 1TB of NVMe storage from Gigabyte and this video card. Okay, so let us start with the card's productivity performance and how it fared in benchmarks. Now in Unigine Superposition, the card pulls off massive scores. My 3070 is humiliated by what the 4090 can do. Now coming to 3D Mark benchmarks, well, the scores are out of this world. The card easily hits 20,000 points in every port trial run, and that is just unimaginable. Okay, so now let us check whether this card is any good for creative professionals and creators like me. So the card completely butchered the Blender benchmark. It scored over 12,000 points with all of the 3 runs combined, and I have never seen such a high score. Now moving over to 4K export times, the card easily handled a very complex render and just did it within 5 to 6 minutes. Now the 4090 is the first card of its tier that we are reviewing on this channel, and I really do not want to compare it with my 3070, which is in a completely different league. So until we get hands on something like a 4080 or a 3090 or a 3090 Ti, I cannot prove any context to how these scores compare against other video cards on the market. So it might be hard to visualize how massive of a generational leap the 4090 is. Now coming from a 3070 to a 4090 for a couple of weeks, I can easily say that everything from photo editing to video editing to even gaming was much better. When talking about gaming, let's see how this big boy performs in some of the latest titles. Now in terms of pure rasterization performance, the 4090's 16,000 CUDA cores really show off their true potential. Now while running the games at 1440p, we got almost 500 FPS in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. That is enough to exploit some of the highest end monitors that are currently launching on the market. Modern Warfare 2 also had almost 180 frames, and that is quite respectable. Moving over to Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we got over 150 frames, and this really shows that this game is starting to age at this point. Now the next game up is Control, and we got over 160 frames, which really goes on to show that the 4090 is way overkill for 1440p gaming. Now in Untitled Requiem, which is a new release, the game easily hits over 100 frames, and that shows what the 4090 can do. Now Fortnite got a whole lot more demanding with the Chapter 4 update. Even after that, the 4090 easily pulled off over 110 frames in this game, which really shows off its rendering prowess. Now the game easily pulled off over 130 frames in Cyberpunk 2077. The frame rate was so high that I went back to the settings just to verify whether everything was set to the absolute maximum. I could not believe my own eyes. Okay, now let us crank the resolution up to 4K and let's see how the 4090 performs. Now in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, the card hit around 280 frames, which is massive at 4K. Shadow of the Tomb Raider saw very minimal performance hit while cranking up the resolution, which clearly shows that the game was CPU bound at 1440p. Now in Modern Warfare 2, we get over 120 frames, which really shows off that the game is well optimized on PC. Now in Control, the frame rate drops below 100, but 90 FPS is more than enough in a title like this. Now moving over to Cyberpunk 2077, the card hits over 70 frames per second, which again is outworldly. In Untitled Requiem, the card easily hits 4K 60 frames per second, which is more than enough to enjoy this game. Now Fortnite shows off how demanding it has gotten with the latest Chapter 4 update, with even the 4090 running the game at less than 60 frames per second. Alright, so now let's just move over to ray tracing performance and see how good 3rd generation RT cores are in video games. Now for all of these benchmarks, we set ray tracing to the absolute maximum in the game with the exception of Cyberpunk 2077. Now in Cyberpunk 2077, ray tracing was set to RT Ultra because Psycho is unrealistic and even the 4090 falters in that setting. Okay, starting with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we get over 120 frames in 1440p, which really shows that 3rd generation of RT is a huge step up from 2nd generation of RT cores. In Control, we get almost 90 frames at 1440p, which shows off that the card is really powerful at this resolution. In F122, we get 85 frames on average with pretty decent 1 and 0.1% numbers. Now if you're playing with a 4090 at 1440p, you clearly do not need any form of upscaling. Moving over to Fortnite, which finally has a stable ray tracing update, the card scores 80 frames on average, which might be a bit less than ideal, but it is more than enough for an enjoyable experience. In Cyberpunk 2077, we get 72 frames on average at 1440p with ray tracing set to Ultra. Well, for the first time with ray tracing turned on, did any video card hit 60 frames per second under my observation. Well done, Nvidia. Okay, so now let's just move up to 4K and see how this card holds up at today's standard resolution. Starting off with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the card again scores over 100 frames per second even at 4K. Well, the game is really getting old today. In F122, we get a really nice frame rate with a decent 1 and 0.1% low numbers. Moving over to Control, we get almost 60 frames per second at 4K with ray tracing turned to the absolute highest. This is massive. Now in Fortnite, we get 50 frames per second on average with pretty decent 1 and 0.1% low numbers. I mean, the game is totally playable at 4K if you want to crank all of the settings up to the maximum, but in a competitive title like Fortnite, I would really not suggest you do so. Now coming to Cyberpunk, well, Cyberpunk is Cyberpunk, but the 4090 is really impressive, and at 4K without any form of upscaling, the card managed over 30 frames per second, and that in itself is a feat. Okay, so the card is great for gaming. Considering all of the numbers that we just saw, I'm giving it a solid 9 of 10. Okay, so now let us talk about DLSS. Now with the 40 series graphics cards, Nvidia has introduced DLSS 3, which is a massive step up in temporal upscaling technologies. It packs AI upscaling and frame generation and new technology into one to achieve frame rate gains like never before. Now until DLSS 2, the technology was rendering the game at a lower resolution, then using AI to upscale it to the native resolution of the display. But with frame generation and DLSS 3, things have changed a lot. So now the card renders the frames at the display's native resolution, but what the AI does is that it takes 2 consecutive frames and then generates frames that can go in between them. This effectively multiplies the frame rate by a factor of 2 to even 5 in some cases. I mean, the gains with DLSS 3 are impressive. In Portal with RTX, which was released as a demo of the new 40 series cards, you can easily see that turning on DLSS frame generation pushes the frame rate up by almost 3 times. In A Plague Tale Requiem, which is a pretty demanding game considering how good it looks, DLSS frame generation and reflex low latency multiplies the frame rate by 2 times. So now DLSS 3 is new to the market and very few games support it, but the technology is being added to more titles every day and the library will soon grow to a massive one just like DLSS 2. Oh, and talking about DLSS 2, the card packs massive gains with the older version of the technology. Now the 7th generation Tensor cores to really put a lot of work, and we can easily see massive gains in titles like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. In both of these games, the frame rate increased by around 20 to 30%, which is a massive gain. And this trend continues across Control, Fortnite, Cyberpunk 2077, and pretty much every other game that supports DLSS 2. Overall, I like where DLSS is headed. DLSS frame generation takes things to a whole other level and makes the 4090 an even bigger pixel pusher than it is in practice. Now considering all of this, I'm giving the card an 8 of 10 in this aspect. Okay, so now that we are done talking about the good stuff, let us look at power consumption, clock speeds and stuff like that. Now the 4090 FE is rated at 450 watts. It cannot go up to 600 watts unlike some AIB cards out in the market. Now this easily ranks it among the least power efficient cards in the market. Now when stressed with Formark, the card hits 448 watts and it maintains a steady power draw. However, you will be surprised to know that this is not the case with video games. Now depending on the workload, the 4090 can intelligently scale down its power draw. This makes it more power efficient as you keep on dropping the resolution. Now while running Fortnite with ray tracing without any form of temporal upscaling, the card draws around 290 watts. Cyberpunk is a worst case load than this, and in this video game, the power draw goes up to 320 watts. But if you drop the resolution in 1440p, the power draw in Fortnite comes down to around 240 to 250 watts, which is way below the advertised 450 watt power draw of the 4090. This was not the case with the 30 series cards, which would easily pull almost as much as the advertised power draw limit was. Now I think this is a really smart move and it will really help Nvidia in gathering some brownie points from reviewers like us. Okay, considering all of this, I think the card deserves an 8 of 10. Alright, so now let us talk about thermal efficiency. Now, like I mentioned before, the 4090 FE is an overkill thermal design for the GPU inside, and it easily shows it off in stress tests and video games alike. Now, when we stress the GPU with Formark, the card hit 71 degrees and it maintained that temperature for a long time. Now, in video games, the card does not go above 53 degrees irrespective of the resolution you're playing at. Now, this easily makes the 4090 one of the most thermally efficient cards despite having some of the highest power draws in the market. I think the card deserves a solid 9 of 10 in this aspect. Okay, so now let us talk a bit about the fans of the card. Now, as I mentioned before, the fans are extremely quiet even when the card is under full load. Now, they have massive RPM ratings, but the fans never get over 40% usage. Now, the two fans of the card run at different speeds, so they are not running in unison. During our Formark stress test, one fan shot up to 1530 RPM, while the second one maintained a speed of around 1400 RPM. So if the card requires more cooling, these fans can easily ramp up to much higher speeds and push the GPU down to much lower temperatures. But that apparently is not needed during normal functioning, even not during the Formark stress test, which easily is a GPU killing load. So considering all of this, I'm giving the fans an 8.5 of 10. Okay, so I also tried overclocking the 4090, which might sound excessive because no one needs as much power as a 4090, let alone overclock it to get more performance out of it. But to be honest, the 4090 really disappointed me with its overclocking potential. I mean, it might be the Founders Edition card and some third-party AIB cards which is strictly marked as OC might perform better, but this card is disappointing. The 4090 FE delivers the maximum performance when the GPU core clock is set at a 150 MHz offset and the memory clock is set at a 250 MHz offset. With these settings enabled, the card was around 1% faster in benchmarks and about the same in video games. And as we started to push the card beyond these numbers, the score started to dip and went even below what we achieved with stock settings. Now I was expecting the 4090 FE to not overclock well, but the results are way more disappointing than I thought them to be. I'm giving the card a 6 of 10 in this aspect. Alright, so now Nvidia suggests an MSRP of $1,599 for the 4090 FE. In India, it sells for 1,58,000 rupees. That is way too much for a piece of computer hardware. But the most interesting thing of all is that you will almost never find a 4090 FE for $1,599 or 1,58,000 rupees. In India, third-party AIB models can go up to over 2 lakh rupees. Same goes for the American market. You can find the 4090 FEs going for over $2,100 to even $2,200. I mean, if you want to build a PC for $2,000, you'll get a really solid system that can play every game at 4K. So why do you need the 4090 at all? That is an important question, and the answer is if you're not an enthusiast who wants to play every game at 4K at the highest settings with ray tracing turned on and without DLSS, you don't need one 4090. Nvidia is going all out for this card. They have claimed the performance crown, but whether this makes sense for most gamers is questionable. And for the most part, I think the answer is no. You don't need to spend $1,600 behind a video card. Now, if you are an enthusiast and you have the kind of money to dump behind a gaming system, go for it. It is great technology. There is no denying the fact that the 4090 is a massive step forward in graphics rendering technology. But it just is not for everyone. So considering all of this, I'm giving the 4090 a 5 of 10 in the value aspect. I don't think it deserves anything more. To wrap things up, the 4090 is a solid video card. It literally is the fastest on the market. You cannot go wrong with it. But as we saw, you really need to have a high-end setup to be able to get 100% out of this video card. This list includes CPU, motherboards, monitors, and everything. Okay, so now let us look at the score, and the 4090 gets an 8.2 out of 10. And with this score, it gets the Cyberpunk Gold Award. Keep in mind that we factor in a lot more than just performance to give these awards to products. Okay, so now if you're looking for more graphics card content, check out this RTX 3070 I reviewed a while back. Do not forget to leave a like and subscribe. 99% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. Come on, reduce that ratio already.